Good evening and welcome to The Square. Tonight's discussion is going to focus on a very important topic, not only in the public sphere, but also in the private sphere. And this is to do with surrogacy in Rwanda. We're going to look at the legal as well as ethical frameworks of this relatively new phenomenon amongst couples in Rwanda. And with us tonight to shed light on what surrogacy is, what it entails, what medical assisted reproduction or procreation entails. We have with us Dr. Eugene Ngoga, who is a chief consultant obstetrics and gynecology at the Rwanda Military Hospital. Dr. Ngoga, pleasure to have you on The Square.
Thank you.
We are also joined by a human rights lawyer as well as advocate, Mr. Christian Garuka. Christian, great to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Great. My name is Dana Pisi, host of The Square. I'm joined by The Square's resident panelists, Brian Namata. Great to have you on the show.
Thank you, Dana.
I love your Uzi collection dress.
Thank you.
And likewise to you, Charlie, dressed in Uzi. Great to have you on the show.
Thank you, Dana. How are you?
Good.
Good.
Before we kick off, any midweek highlights you'd like to share?
I am extremely embarrassed that I discovered how much of a villager I am in Kigali. So, and I know, Diana, you don't like me for this, for giving credit where it's due, especially in my capacity. But on Saturday, and again yesterday, I used two brand new roads to connect from Kigali to Gahanga and to Chichichiro, basically that other side, moving from this side of Gasabo to the other side of Chichichiro. 6 months ago, the roads were not there. 6 months ago, there was lots of buildings around there. I could see works going on. I didn't know what road would pass where. I was beaten. I was very positively mesmerized. I really felt like a villager. I was so embarrassed.
So the roads,
yes.
Kudos to the roads, road
and the city of
construction.
Kigali and RTD and whoever is in charge of this. It's amazing, and you know the whole pain of getting clogged in the jam at either Gishushu or Sonatib or the other side. I was very, very impressed. Yeah.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
Job. Yeah.
Brenna, any midweek highlights you'd like to share before we kick off tonight's discussion?
International affairs. Last night, the announcement from the U.S. Biden's running mates and
Kamala Harris.
Yes. The annoying bit around this whole discussion around Kamala is she's black, she's a woman. It's like she has nothing else to offer. Yeah. So it's a shame that almost 100 years later, even in the developed world, people are still obsessing about a woman, black. I mean.
And she has much more to bring to the table.
Yeah.
That they could focus on.
Yes, absolutely.
I know they refer to her as a super cop. When she was a DA, she was really strict. But you're right. You're right about other adjectives, I guess, they could use to describe her, other than being.
She's a woman. She's black. She's younger.
So you prefer a different. You prefer different.
Yeah. Just look at her credentials.
I agree. I agree. Well, we are here to discuss a very, I would say, controversial, new phenomenon that is in Rwanda, has hit Rwanda, especially amongst couples who are trying to reproduce and unable to do so naturally, so use medically assisted methods. And in this case, this includes IVF, in vitro fertilization, as well as surrogacy. And we're here to delve into all that and understand the legal and ethical frameworks around it and why it is currently considered, surrogacy is currently not considered legal in the country. So the first question is to you, Dr. Ngoga, because we'd love to understand the science behind this phenomenon in Rwanda. If you'd just allow me to start by describing you and a bit of your background. You're the founder and president of the Rwandan Society of Obstetrics and Gynecology, as well as the president of the East Central and Southern African College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists. So your specialty, some of your specialty also lies in medically assisted procreation or reproduction, if you will. And if you could just start by telling us the different types of medically assisted reproduction. So, and here we are talking about in vitro fertilization as well as surrogacy.
So thank you very much, Diana. So to understand better what is in vitro fertilizations or assisted reproductive technique, I think it's better now to understand, first of all, how someone gets pregnant. It might look very simple, but it's when two people, it's a man and a woman, gametes. When we talk about gametes, we talk about spermatozoa from the man, and we talk about oocytes for the woman. And during intercourse, then there is ejaculation of a spermatozoa, which will move through the uterus, through the fallopian tube, and it's going to meet the egg, what we call an egg or oocyte, at the level of the ample of the tube. So that's a natural process, and that's why sometimes women, they understand that every month they get ovulation. So ovulation is a chance of having a baby if by chance you have that connection. So it seems that at one point that's a normal, natural way can have issues. And issues can be from men, can be from women. Unfortunately, in our society, we still have men who think that only women have issues with fertility. It's not true. It's more or less 50%, both sides. So from the man, what we can have as a problem is that the spermatozoa can be absent completely, which we call azoospermia, and that is due to various causes like genetic, like infection, like a trauma, and other environmental factors. He can have maybe spermatozoa which are very low in count, maybe low sound speed, and the morphology can be abnormal. So those are more or less abnormalities we can get from the man. But on the side of the woman, we can also have issues which will stop that interaction to happen. And one of the most common is the fallopian tube, which are blocked. And most of the time the cause is infection, which they don't pick up earlier. When those things happen like that, that's where people thought about how to help those couples to conceive. Meaning that we need to rely on artificial insemination or artificial reproductive techniques, which is more or less to do the same way things have been done naturally, but also to solve problems which have been happening. I can give you an example for someone who has, a woman who has tubes which are blocked. So it seems that whatever good sperm are and the eggs are, they'll never meet because there's an obstacle somewhere. So we need either to operate that tube and make it functional, or it's not possible to operate on to make it functional, then we need to use the techniques. So how do we do that? So we normally stimulate the woman. So we give medication so that she can grow the eggs. And when the time of ovulation comes, we have to aspirate. We have to remove those eggs from the body and put them in a laboratory. And at the same time, the man will give us the sperm, which is easy to give. There's no operation or any intervention for that. And our specialists, our technician in laboratory, they'll fertilize. So they'll put them together. And then once you get that, you get what we call fertilizations. And after that, we get other steps, and it will give you embryos. So those embryos, that's what begins with the baby. So the embryos will be taken again and replaced in the womb of the woman by a small catheter, which will introduce through the vagina, the cervix, and we go and deposit in the uterus. So you understand that we've bypassed that problem in the tube and make sure that the embryo is placed in the right the position. But you understand that we need that uterus to function. We need it in normal conditions. So there are other conditions which will make that the uterus of the woman is not able to receive that embryo. Whatever you do, whatever medication, whatever intervention, and that's why you come up, you say, okay, look, this is impossible for you to carry a pregnancy. So your uterus is, let us say, useless. It cannot help you at this stage. So you have to look for someone else to carry this pregnancy for you, and then once the baby is born, it's at that point, this baby is your baby, genetically speaking, and you and your husband, because the product came from you. And because the uterus is not able to take that, so we have to rely on someone else. And that's what we call surrogacy. So surrogacy is just to use the uterus of someone else to carry the pregnancy for the couple. And this is something which, as you said, is still but new in Rwanda. And as we know that whoever will conceive and deliver the baby, automatically the baby will be given to that woman and the name given there. So that's the dilemma which is still there. But for us, look at the science. This baby belongs to the parents. And the parents is the father and the mother who provided those gametes. So in vitro fertilization or reproductive techniques, they have been there for quite a long time now. The first baby was born in 1978. So it was difficult at the beginning, but over the years, there's a lot of improvement. I can remember that before 1992, it was quite impossible for a man who have a very low count sperm to get a child. So today, or since that time, it was discovered another machine, another technique, which is called ICSI, intracytoplasmic sperm injection, when you take even the few sperm you can get and inject it directly in the oocyte. And people have been having children with that technique, and it was a big revolution at that time. So surrogacy is still there. I think the first baby was born effectively by surrogacy. It was 1986. And in so many countries in the world, this is something which is happening. If you look at the literature, you can find that in some countries like the US, every year they get around 750 babies born by that method. So it's something which is happening all over the world. And we need to understand, medically speaking, is it a problem? For us, we don't see that. The only thing which we need to understand is that the person who will agree to be a surrogate must be well prepared, psychologically prepared, must be tested to see if there's no type of infection which can be transmitted to the baby. So evaluate his psychological impact. And then only when everything is ready, at that moment that we can go ahead with surrogacy. Of course, maybe my colleague will talk about it. We should have a kind of agreement within the two people, the couple and the one surrogate, and see how, at the end, the baby can go back to the legal people.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Ngoga. That was extremely informative. And I like the way you really put the science in the simplest terms possible on what surrogacy is and the need for it, as well as IVF. Now, before we go to Christian Garuka, looking at the legal implications and as well as talking about ethics, I just want us to go to a Twitter feed, just very quickly, so as to give you an idea of what the public thinks about this, or what the public is talking about when we announced that this is the topic that we had tonight. And the first, if we could have it on the screens, the first tweet is from someone called Frank Chigenza, who says, assisted reproductive health, surrogacy in particular, is shrouded in complex ethical, psychological, and legal issues. Access must be very limited and tightly regulated. We do not want to end up with the rich hiring a womb and exploiting the poor. And this is something that we're definitely going to discuss when it comes to the ethics around it. We also have another tweet from Nsanga Sylvie, who states that I wrote a paper on surrogacy 10 years ago. It was an option for some families or individuals with health problems, just as the doctor mentioned. Also mitigate shaming by African women, even in case they aren't the ones who are sterile. It was also an option. It's an option young women are considering due to African male brutality, I think, is what she meant. And then the last tweet before we go to the resident panelists and hearing from Christia Garuka is from Nick the Legend, who, on the topic of surrogacy, clearly states that this is both unethical to our cultural confines and a great deal of a threat to the marriage institution. Nick the Legend says that if you cannot conceive either by choice or by circumstance, fine, adopt a child. We have enough roaming around helplessly. So clearly, the tweets, the messages that we're getting from our social media feeds are very diverse. very different in opinion. And just before we hear from you, Christia, on the legal aspect and the ethical aspect, I'd like to hear from my resident panelists on what they have to say about the matter before we hand over to you, Christia. Charles, would you like to weigh in?
First of all, I want to commend Dr. Ngoga. Clearly, as a senior officer in the army, he explains things very meticulously.
Absolutely.
I think if it was an ordinary doctor who does not have a military background, it would have been a little bit different. It would have dazzled us.
No, he's very straight to the point.
Yes, but congratulations, Daktari. You've simplified something complicated. I think he says something that makes us remember that we are real human beings. He brings an assumption that if you sleep with somebody and it is their time to conceive, that they will conceive. And if they don't conceive, it is their problem. So I think that he raises a very, very pertinent point that I think, in my opinion, has to go down to local administrative organs and say, it is okay, it is normal not to conceive. Whether the fault, and it is normal that the fault might be the man's or the woman's.
Exactly.
And I think that is one thing that a lot of us have taken for granted, that you have a problem. No, you actually don't have a problem. It's normal. I like that Daktari kept saying, if you are lucky. So even conceiving is luck.
It's a miracle.
Yes. So I think that's something I think that everybody needs to keep at the back of their minds, and the way Daktari has put it is the biggest eye opener for me, and I want it really emphasized to everybody who cares to listen, that conceiving is luck. It's not necessarily the other way around.
That's
that not conceiving is bad luck. No, even conceiving is luck.
Yeah.
Yes.
Interesting. Charles, Brenna, would you like to weigh in?
Just to mention that one can imagine the pressure that our society exerts on couples, especially. When people get married, the question is always,
I think 2 months after they get married.
it's always, where are the babies, and there's so much pressure. And this is because our society takes it for granted. One, that when people get married, they're getting married because they want children. Sometimes people get married and they don't want children. The second thing is that, as the doctor explained it, it's not sort of a one-day event, just the act. It's the reproductive system. It's a combination of so many other health factors. But we tend to see that our society, one, places a lot of pressure on women generally around these issues. But like he explained, it could be on the other side. And I think there's room for that awareness, to create that awareness, to make it clear that when a couple is not conceiving, it's not necessarily the problem of the woman. The other issue is that, for me, I feel that the debate is always about a woman for some reason. Because even as we talk about the options, it involves a woman. This woman who's going to carry the baby on behalf of the other.
The other woman, yes.
And, you can imagine for all these women, I don't think it's an easy one. It's an easy decision, even for the one that is accepting to do it. So it is so important that we have an awareness that the emotional burden is just too much, not just on the couple, but even going through the process. He will probably talk about even the cost. It's very expensive. So you want to first of all, even reduce the pressure. If you can't do it on the financial aspect, because we probably don't have the capacity as yet, reduce on the emotional burden.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I like the point that you raised that, all this also has a large impact on women, because surrogacy, the topic that we're talking about specifically, is to do with uteruses. These are specific to women, and yet I feel that once again, women's bodies, to a certain degree, are being regulated. And I think this is where we come into the legal aspects. Christia, we know that in a ruling by the Kicukiro Primary Court on 30th June, a plea lodged by a Rwandan couple to take on surrogacy was declared not legal because there are no provisions that embrace surrogacy as a way of reproduction in Rwanda. But at the same time, we have, if you could share with us, medically assisted reproduction, such as IVF, is legal. So why would surrogacy be illegal? So what we'd like to hear from you is just understanding what is the legal framework around surrogacy in Rwanda, and how come for other elements of medically assisted reproduction, that's legal, while this, in this particular case, is not considered legal. If you could shed some light on that.
Yeah, thank you very much, Diana. I'll start by saying surrogacy is legal in Rwanda, but it's not regulated. So we have to make a clear distinction between the two. When I say it's legal, I look at the legal framework. As when you look at Article 254 of the law on relating family and persons, it says that procreation occurs between a man and a woman, or it can occur through medically assistance technology. And when you look at it, the law does not define what should constitute medically assistance technology, but I will refer to the WHO definition, which says that surrogacy is part of the technology. So from there, we can also go further. The only issue we have with our current legal framework, it's so open. For some activists, they could say this is the most progressive provision, but it also has some risks, which could also raise some ethical issues. The first one, the law is not clear whether the surrogacy should be commercial or not, because the second paragraph of this article says for the parties to have access to surrogacy, they have to sign an agreement. And then they leave to the parties to agree on the terms of the agreement. So there's a possibility of having a commercial surrogacy. This has been criticized by many activists, where they have said poor women are likely to be exploited by those rich who can afford these kind of services. But our law does not prevent anyone from having such kind of agreement. From our legal point of view, what is not prohibited, it's allowed. And I assume that my friend Charlie will share this kind of thinking with me, because for us to say something is illegal, we need to have a law which clearly prohibits that kind of behavior or action. That's one. Secondly, our law says procreation can occur between a man and a woman. It's not clear about the marital status. It's still open. It means even a single lady can still benefit from this technology. It also means anyone can come in Rwanda and exploit this loophole and get access to surrogacy. The other issue, probably people tend to think surrogacy should only be reserved for married couple. The law is not clear about that. It's also not clear who should be eligible. Probably some would say it should only used to treat infertility. But the law does not say anything about infertility. You can look at different countries, like in Greece and Estonia. People have access to surrogacy in case they want to treat infertility, that's one case. Secondly, in case there's a risk of a transmission of hereditary disease. Probably the doctor could expand more a little bit on that. That's also an option. Also, there are other countries where single ladies can just decide to go for surrogacy. They don't need to be married or to suffer from any specific infertility. So the law is very open, and the other side, which I'm quite pessimistic, will be the lack of guidance. As currently we don't have a specific law with all those details, the medical doctors is left to make use of his common sense. That's a problem I see from the legal perspective. If someone decides to go and visit a fertility center in Rwanda, so it will depend who will be consulting the person. Someone will just say, go and seek a court order, or just say, just come, no problem. And also, we don't know right now if in Rwanda it's allowed also to donate your sperm. So it's also raises another issue, because in some countries you can come and donate your sperm, and they will keep your identity as anonymous. In Rwanda, we don't know if they will ever disclose your identity to their future child, or they will keep it anonymous. So we need really to regulate all those practices around surrogacy.
Absolutely. It's really, I feel like there's a lot of ambiguity around, the law, Article 254 that you mentioned, that needs a lot of clarification. And I would like to just also take this opportunity again to hear from our viewers on their understanding of, some of the issues that you've just talked about right now, before we go back to you, Dr. Ngoga. So we also have another tweet from Frank Chigenza that states that you don't need a surrogate if the issue is with the man, though. A surrogate is required if the woman is medically unable to carry a baby in their womb, or for the rich and famous who don't have time for a 9 months pregnancy. Okay, these are some of the views from our viewers on social media. We have another tweet that has come in stating that, and this echoes what you said, Mr. Christian, that surrogacy is not illegal. For something to be legal, it has to be prohibited by laws. It is just explicitly inexistent in our laws, or not well defined. And Christian, I think this is what you were alluding to earlier. And I think we'll have a bit more conversation on the need for clarity on surrogacy as a medically assisted reproductive method. We also have another tweet from Muhire Eve, who states that the judge, I think in the first, when it was ruled in the Kichukiro Primary Court, Eve states that the judge who should have acted as a legislator, relying on precedents, customs, general principles of law and doctrine. It was an opportunity for him or her to educate and explain this article because it is an obligation to do so. So these are tweets basically stating, talking about the case that is currently going to go to an appeal, and so forth and so on. And the last tweet, before we take it back to the conversation with our panelists, is from Ken, who states that, and I'm assuming here he's talking about the surrogate mothers. These individuals are either coerced secondary to their financial needs or are not sufficiently educated to clearly appreciate the implications of the consent they're providing. As such, this would not constitute informed consent. I want us to quickly talk about some of these tweets. You can see one school of thought states that if surrogacy, if we say that, yes, the provisions made for it, there's some people who would be exploited, there are people who are uneducated, who would be financially, you would be financially influenced, and so forth and so on. Dr. Ngoga, if we could go back to you, if you want to respond to some of the tweets that have come through, but also if you just start by giving us a broad overview of the options of medically assisted reproduction that is available to couples in this country?
Yeah, first of all, what I want to say is that people, they should recognize that a child is a gift from God. And also artificial reproductive technique is a gift from God. So that's how things are today. So I can imagine that the first time people, they saw a plane in the sky, it was quite maybe surprising because they know that only angels can appear in the sky. But today, all of us, we go to the airports and we take the plane so easily and we accept it. So I think we should also get at a point where we accept that with development, we can bring life back to people. Because we know in our society that it's very tough to live with no family, with no children. So people who are arguing this and this and this, they should understand that side of the coin as well. I'm glad that Christian said that this is not prohibited, but we just need to regulate and put some order. I don't support exploitation of surrogate mother. I think that will be one of the things which people, they can look at that. But when someone comes and say, this is my sister had a problem. The first child, she had maybe what we call in our term a postpartum hemorrhage. So bleeding, excessive bleeding, and we were forced to remove the uterus, and the baby didn't survive. So what do you think this couple will go through for the rest of their life? So that's where these artificial reproductive techniques come to support it. And if someone has a member of family, a sister who said, I'm ready to do so for her, I think this will be a genuine request. So we have to look at our laws in details just to avoid maybe misuse, understand what people, they are saying, that exploitation can be there. All of these things have been happening all over the world. There are even countries where surrogacy, commercial surrogacy was allowed. But recently, they've stopped them because they are bringing a lot of issues, ethical issues. So we can also exploit those past experience from other countries and see what can fit our society. But at least to give a chance to whoever has this kind of problem, which can stop them conceiving, I think that can be very good. So medical speaking, again, I repeat, there's nothing wrong. As long as the mother and the father, biologically, genetically, they are well defined, and as long as the person who's willing to carry the pregnancy for the couple, and maybe this is voluntary. When comes money, that's where maybe issues comes in, because exploitation will come. But if someone is willing to do that, as long as prepared psychologically and also support during the pregnancy, because it's not an easy thing, so it means that being close to that, I think something which is feasible without a lot of consequences to the couple and consequences to the surrogate. So the main issue here is to say who will take care of the child, and that's where the law must be clear on that. And I think that some of the questions have been asked are relevant, but I think the law comes to organize people to make sure that this is done correctly. There are no one who will be offended, there are no people who will be abused and things like that. So I agree that we should go deep and look at the law, but so far what we have doesn't stop us giving the service.
Just very quickly, what options exist in Rwanda for couples that are unable to reproduce naturally? I know some of the viewers would just like to have an idea. Are there fertility centers in this country? Are there fertility services?
Yes, we do have fertility centers here in Rwanda. We have actually 2 of them. So the first one was established in 2014. It's a private clinic. It's Medihill Diagnostic and Fertility Center, which is located in Kimihurura. And I started with it at that time, 2014. And then 2 years ago, I left and I went back to Rwanda Military Hospital, where we opened the fertility treatment. So we normally give regular, how do you call it? We don't use IVF, which is gets the sperm of the man and the wife. So that's as long as they have issues of conceiving, so that we can help them to conceive. And it's the same with the Rwanda Military Hospital. So we don't have yet a donation program at the moment, which is clear there. People, they used to go to India and other places, but at the moment we still need to get it sorted out by the law at the moment. But what I say also to remind people that not all the couples infertility will require artificial insemination, artificial reproductive techniques. So there are so many also we help with medication and they manage to conceive. There are also those who help with operations and manage to conceive. But maybe 5 to 10% of the rest will go through. And this was really a big achievement in Rwanda because before that, at one point, we were like, we can't help you anymore. So look for money and go to wherever you can get it. And it's quite expensive and stressful because the wife will stay for maybe a month there. The husband will go to meet the wife. And sometimes they don't say anything at workplace. So it will be very difficult because they don't want this to appear as a problem. So many difficulties around. So, but today you can do it even when you are going to work. Anybody, it will decrease the stress of the couple. So we really salute that development.
Fantastic. Charles Brenner, I would like to hear your thoughts. Like we said earlier on in the show, it's a very complex matter. It's an emotional, stressful. There's so much that goes on with, artificial reproduction and so much thinking that I think we need to embrace and move with the times in this country, especially, I was listening to the doctor saying, for a couple who, the woman after giving birth lost the baby, plus she's hemorrhaged, postpartum, has to remove her uterus. And this is a young couple who probably wants to give birth. These are some of the things that I think are worth talking about. Charles, is there something you'd like to
Yes,
add?
First of all, and I'm sure Dr. will agree with me, there is no man that does not fire blanks. Yes.
Speak in plain English, like the doctor, please.
Like you like to tell others.
No, I'm sure I have made my message. There's no man who does not fire blanks. That said, and that's the point I've made, and I have rested it there. But I want to react to something that one of our viewers mentioned around there's a court case. I think it's in the Nyarugenge Intermediate Court. It should have been pronounced today. It was not. It was referred to a later date, and Christian alluded to it at the earlier on the show. By the way, for your information, I spent 4 years of my university life seated on the same desk with Christian.
Nice.
But Christian alluded to something around a legal gap, for lack of a better word. And somebody, one of our viewers, insinuated that the judge should have worn a legislator's hat and said, no, even though the law does not allow me to pronounce the judgment in this direction, I'll pronounce it in this direction. Now, you see, legally or medically or professionally speaking, irrespective of where you lie, there's one very rude French saying that toute la vérité n'est pas bonne à dire. All truths must not be told bluntly. So all these professionals, whether it is an accountant or an architect or a doctor or a lawyer, they will find a way of not necessarily telling you something as bluntly as it should be, not because they want to hide it from you, but because they are considering the other factors. And here I introduce the social factor. Dr. Ngoga was very, very cagey in his contributions throughout the show by saying medically speaking. It's very deliberate because he wants to be defended just to the extent of medicine. But he knows very well, actually, when he began earlier on, he said, I think these lawyers should be better at saying whatever they're saying. It's because he knows the answer is not entirely in medicine. Christian mentioned it as well. The answer is not entirely legal. There's a social aspect to it. And somebody asked a question there, one of our viewers, about genetics. Can you imagine that, and I'm going to give practical examples the way we are, the 5 of us here. God forbid, Bana has a medical condition, and between Bana and I, we agree that you will be the surrogate mother, and you carry the baby for 9 months, and you get affectionate, and then you give birth. The baby feeds through your blood, and the baby is born naturally, and then you develop that bond, and then once you have that bond, you say sorry.
You agreed to what you agreed to.
We agreed to what you agreed to, and this is what is on the dotted line. And as Christian was saying, that the end is not necessarily in the contract. So we as human beings, we are susceptible to acknowledging that a contract is, yes, it is binding just between the parties, but at the end of the day, it's human beings. So the social aspect, in my opinion, is the hugest challenge, and it can only be addressed by one thing, again, in my opinion, is by moving on. By moving on. And Daktari alluded to a few things. He gave an example of aeroplanes in the sky, but I'm sure there are people who are complaining that robots have taken people's jobs at Kanombe Airport. Right?
Yeah.
So if we have accepted that technology is as such that we no longer need to burn hundreds of liters of ambulance diesel to move blood from Gachenye to Chisaro, and we use drones, why can't we accept that to build families and cohesion of families, we need surrogate mothers?
Valid point.
Yeah.
And I like that you took us through, and we finally got to it. I know it's very
Aspiring professor.
You know, Prana?
I just feel like it relates to the discussion we had last week about the awareness of the world today. You know, we should be grateful that technology is making things possible, because we know for a very long time there was no option, because, you know, the science had not solved the problem. So once we have the technology, I think then the framework that allows technology to work in a way that it does not create more harm than good is what should naturally follow. So clearly there's demand, and what we need now is a framework that allows things to be done in a proper way.
Absolutely.
And also to increase the level of awareness, to demystify what it is. Because as we speak today, you know, people still can't imagine how that happens.
Exactly. I'm pregnant for
You know,
9 months
yes.
for you, you know?
Yes.
Yes.
Many people still can't get their head around the issue. So, and yet, increasingly we're saying this is happening, and we also know that, like, people are concerned, it's big business elsewhere, you know. But just because you are against the big business doesn't mean that you won't let it happen because you're worried about making it a lucrative business. I think the right way to we should do is simply set the framework so that the guidelines are very clear, and also try to build the ecosystem that facilitates the whole process. Because beyond the guides, you need the counselors that will be able to support the couple and the mother that is involved. How do you do that? We already know we have a problem with
mental health.
You know. And so there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And I'm grateful that this discussion is beginning to happen. The debate is okay. Let people talk about their feelings, and then we get to understand what the issues are. But most importantly, I think people need to understand that back then, when people used to just look at women as I'm tempted to say laboratories, you know, who just
Vessels.
Yeah, like, you know, a woman's job is just to pump out a baby and that's it. Those days are gone, you know. So we must get ready for that future, and where you will have some women saying, no, I don't want to carry the child for 9 months. And it's within her right. If she can afford it, she should be able to do it, So
let's prepare for the future.
Yeah, it is happening elsewhere, and it is going to happen. Yeah, and like they're saying, the lawyer was very clear. As it is now, if we don't straighten out the framework, we'll have people who will take advantage of the loopholes within the law, because it's already a big business somewhere else. And we have countries even in the region. Ethiopia is one of the countries where it's big business. So to prevent that, rather than bury our heads, within the cultural aspect, saying, oh, you can't talk about that, it's not possible, better put the framework. And then you help one make it safe for everybody involved, and it's clear.
Absolutely, I agree with you. I'd like to have, just before we end the show, go back to Christian. Christian, what is your view on the way forward? What are the next steps? Do you think this particular law, there's potential for it to be reformed so that it can be more explicit, less ambiguous when it comes to medically or artificial reproduction? What are your thoughts on the way forward? What are your expectations?
Yeah, before moving forward, I'd like to respond to one or two tweets. One of the viewers probably made a comment on the ruling, and by a matter of principle, I can't make any comments on an ongoing court proceedings, because I don't want to be seen like someone who's predicting the court outcome, because it's my understanding that now they have lodged an appeal. So we'll wait and see what will come out from this proceeding. And someone also said, why don't people just go for adoption? So when you look at the difference between surrogacy and adoption, for some people, they don't have this kind of a biological connection. That's why some will go straight to surrogacy, and others will go for adoption. And others have argued adoption is more complex than surrogacy, because you have some conditions you must really meet for you to be allowed to adopt, especially in Rwanda. And on the way forward, I think the best way will be to have a standalone law on medically assisted reproduction, because it's a very broad and complex issue which you can't really cater for in one or two sections or articles of any specific law, because it has to deal with surrogacy and others also technologies. But what I would really like to have in that kind of legislation, we have to make sure that we have some specific provisions dealing with the type of surrogacy, to make sure that we don't fall in the trap where poor women could be a victim of exploitation. We have to be clear on that. Also, we have to be clear in terms of eligibility. In some countries, the commissioning parents or the future parents, one of them has to be domiciled in that specific country. Look at South Africa, the UK, and many countries. One of them has to be in that country so that they can at least make some follow-up to make sure that this is the right person who's going to enter this kind of agreement. Also, we need to know, that's law, what should be the consequences of people involved in breaching of the privacy of those involved in surrogacy. Just an example. I discussed with a doctor before the show. It happened in a country, in Germany, where in a fertility center, where they were storing sperms to be used for those surrogate women. A guy was working there. He replaced those sperms with his. And then he ended up having more than 70 children. So if this happens because you don't have a regulation, under the current legal framework, it won't be a crime because we don't have a specific law dealing with how we should store the sperms. So we need also to have in our framework also provision dealing with consent and also counseling, because as you have alluded to, someone might change her mind. And what will happen? We can't just say you signed an agreement, so you have to abide by the agreement. So we need to put in place all those mechanisms to make sure that someone who decides to enter into this kind of agreement, this is what should be done, and also to know if they have to sign this kind of contract, what should be included in the contract. Just to give you an example of our current labor code in terms of our contract, it refers to a ministerial order which says any kind of a written employment contract should at least have A, B, C, D. That's the minimum. So that should also apply for this kind of a surrogacy agreement. We'll say if you have to sign an agreement on surrogacy, there are some boundaries. You can't go beyond A, B, C, D. What should be the minimum age for you to enter this kind of a contract? Is it minority? Who should be eligible? Once you have these conditions, you set those conditions, probably you can make sure that in case there's any dispute, the law will come and help people to address those issues. As someone would say as a human rights activist, medically assisted technology, there's no dispute at all. It's a scientific progress. And if you refer to the International Covenant on Economic and Social Rights, under Article 15, paragraph 1, it says, everyone should benefit from scientific progress. That's the general rule. But we need to set some exceptions, not anyone. And for us to set those restrictions, as a lawyers, we have to make sure that those restrictions also satisfy 3 principles. The first one will be on legality. The second one should be on proportionality. And the last one on necessity. Is it necessary? So once you meet all those principles, then your restriction will be valid. Otherwise, people might end up, I'm about finished.
Christia, thank you very much. We don't really have much time. I mean, this is a meaty discussion. I definitely think we should have but 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 until we see a change. I'd like us to just quickly go to a tweet based on, as we close. And the first tweet is from Isabel, who states that she agrees with Brandon Nabata, and like Dr. Ngoga said, men commonly suffer from low sperm count. There can be incompatibility between couples, and they shouldn't pay the consequences for not having kids. A doctor should establish the need of a surrogate after assessing both. Before we... and I think this is what Dr. Ngoga actually does, the assessment of this. We have a tweet from Emma Walls, who asks that, may I know if a surrogacy mother contributes to the baby's genes, beauty, and behavior? I think what we clarified earlier on in the show is the mother is just a space. It's just the uterus that's being used, but the genes and all that come from both parents who've implanted the gamete, as the doctor said, and in the uterus. We also have another tweet from Rehema, who states that, I am also against the rich doing it for convenience and others want to make it a business. In our society, it should be regulated and as such only be allowed once the couple cannot conceive naturally and other methods have failed. Before we end the show, we'll also listen to a couple of more tweets. I think we have one coming in from Mugisha. Mugisha states that Being a surrogate has health risks. Just as any other pregnancy, there's always a risk involved in carrying a child. You might not get pregnant on the first transfer, and there's always a chance of pregnancy complications that could have a negative effect on your child, on your health. And he ends by saying surrogacy is not right. I disagree with him, but anyway. Yes, so we've come to the end of the show. Unfortunately, we do not have time for, as much content and informative insights we've been listening to and hearing from both our guests here. I would like to thank you once again for coming on The Square, Dr. Ngoga and Advocate Garuka. Thank you so much. Let's keep the conversation going on our social media pages. Lots of messages coming in. We'll wait to see what the couple who filed for appeal. We're looking forward to seeing what the ruling is from this intermediate court that they have gone to in the ensuing days. And to Charles Werner, always a pleasure having you. Thank you for your valid and insightful points. And to our viewers, thank you for tuning in. To our partners, Uzi Collections and Bourbon Coffee, thank you for staying with The Square and supporting us. Keep the conversation going using hashtag #TheSquareRW. Thank you for tuning in. Have a good night and see you again next week.
Yes, my people, we are back on set.
And they get the top 10 people that have a hat that has this. Dumba is coming #1. So that's uniqueness. And then you don't need a lot of things. You just need to think just a little bit. Let me get just a tag out.
And a new look this time around is going to be given to nothing rather than a man, because usually he's been using ladies and girls.
nanjye ubwanjye ndi kwireba nitinye nabaye akabosi k'agasore kakiri gato.
RBA app is here. How'd you get it? It is easier than ever. Go on your home screen. Press Play Store or App Store. Type RBA. Search. There you go. You have RBA app. You have all RBA radios, news, business news, sport and entertainment.
Well, hello there. It is the 12th day of August and is hoping that you had yourselves a lovely day. Let's go straight to what were the top stories tonight. Rwanda's government has reiterated its commitment to promoting good bilateral relations with all countries, including those in the region, but pointed out that all parties involved must play their part. A cross-section of the youth entrepreneurs say that much of their success is based on the country's belief in them. On the international scene, Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro has said it is quote-unquote a lie that fires are ravaging the Amazon rainforest, despite data from his own government showing the number of blazing that is rising. A very good evening to you and welcome to RTV News with me, Fiona Mbabazi. Rwanda's government has reiterated its commitment to promoting good bilateral relations with all countries, including those in the region, but pointed out that all parties involved must play their part. Now, the announcement was made during a presser this Wednesday, and we do have the details with Serge Nori.
Burundi's President General Evariste Ndayishimiye recently publicly stated that Rwanda is holding captive Burundian refugees and has refused to let them return home, allegations that have been met by surprise on the Rwandan side. It is surprising that Rwanda can be accused of holding Burundian refugees hostage when, for the past few weeks, up to 136 Burundians currently in the country that arrived in different ways, some coming when the borders were still open, others coming here seeking medical services, have now asked to return home but have been refused to do so by the authorities in Burundi. Even officials from their own embassy in Rwanda have been coordinating with our Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation on ways to get them home, and we have done our part, but Burundi will not take them back. So on one hand, they do not want to take back people who came legally, some even with official permission to come here for medical treatment, and on the other hand, they accuse us of holding their citizens hostage. I believe we should see this for what it is, that it is their perception of Rwanda-Burundi relations, but concerning us holding refugees hostage, that is impossible. We did not tell them to come here, nor do we have anything to gain by keeping those refugees here. Then there is the issue of the recent attack in Rwanda's Nyaruguru district in the southern province that borders Burundi. Extensive investigations repeatedly pointed to the fact that the attackers came from Burundi. So what do authorities have to say about that? Burundi's government responded by saying that they cannot support people bent on destabilizing Rwanda's security, that the information is false, that such things are impossible. That was the answer they gave us. But as you know, this is not the first time such attacks have been